And so when he gets into prison, they used all of what Amnesty International documented as penal coercion tactics to mess up Tupac's mind. And they used other tactics not even listed in those penal coercion tactics. And so Amnesty International called them the closest thing we have to brainwashing, in terms of U.S. intelligence brainwashing people. Now, of course, I think there's more than that. There's drugs and hypnosis used and other ways they use to brainwash people. But nonetheless, so they really hurt Tupac's mind in prison. And then the evidence shows that Death Row Records tried to carry out those tactics, at least when Tupac got out of prison. And they kept feeding him weed and alcohol as much as possible. They kept, hurting people and even shooting at and killing people, near or in front of Tupac, as if a warning to Tupac. You better not ever leave Death Row Records, and you need us for protection, etc. And so I think they were really, messing up his mind that way. But Tupac was getting away from them. By the summer, before he died, he had said, okay, I finished my 3 CD contract, and that was listed. And, he did a double CD, and then he did a third CD with Machiavelli, 7 Day Theory. And that was 3 CDs. And his contract, he said, was done. And he already started his own record label, started his own film label. He started his own, film company. And everything was set for him to get out of Death Row Records. So he apparently got into serious fights with Suge Knight over this, saying, I'm done, we're done. My contract's done. And so he was settling down at that point. He got engaged to Kidada Jones. They planned to, move out of their Death Row owned house and into their own place. Death Row owned apartment, their own place, and have a baby and all that. He was, smoking a lot less, according to eyewitnesses. He was at a party, for example, and Russell Simmons said everybody was smoking weed and drinking all night, and he wouldn't touch anything. He was just dancing all night. And so, the evidence was he was really settling down. But just before that, there was just so much manipulation of him to write his most negative lyrics, to write his least activist lyrics, with that double CD. And but then his final CD, just before he died, did start to get back into the activist lyrics. And so, I think he was really evolving again.
This is a Jmix exclusive.
Now, John, recently there's been several documentaries and television shows that paint Orlando Anderson as the killer of Tupac Shakur. How do you feel about that narrative, that Orlando Anderson was the killer?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I like what Nick Broomfield, who did the movie Biggie and Tupac, said about Orlando Anderson. He said that Orlando Anderson was the Lee Harvey Oswald of Tupac's murder. And so he was referring to Tupac's murder as a political assassination by citing Lee Harvey Oswald, who, of course, was the patsy for JFK's assassination, John F. Kennedy. And so basically what all the evidence says is that all the evidence shows that Orlando Anderson received a huge amount of money. When I say huge for his standards, just after Tupac's assassination. And but the evidence shows more, though, that he got that money to be a patsy, to take a beating, to make it look, though, that it was a Crips versus Blood situation that ended up killing Tupac versus a professional hit. Now, Russell Poole says Tupac's murder was a professional hit. It was well set up by police. You needed walkie-talkies. You needed all kinds of orchestration to make it happen so perfectly. And to have all those bullets coming from the passenger side, and they all hit Tupac, and virtually, really, none of them hit, Suge Knight. The best evidence says he was hit by, shards of glass, but at least none of them hit, really hurt him. But 13 bullets coming at Tupac and Suge Knight. Suge Knight's twice the size, and so that is a very careful shooting to kill Tupac and not kill Suge Knight, and even wound him badly. That's a very professional job. So I don't think it was Orlando Anderson that shot Tupac, but I do think that Orlando Anderson was paid well to be a patsy, to take a beating, and to make it look like it was something, it was another group other than who it was that killed Tupac.
In your opinion, what was the threat that Tupac posed to the United States government?
Well, to me, Tupac was a threat to the white male, super wealthy, super wealthy oligarchy that really runs this country behind the scenes. He was a leader for people like me and you, and people of color, and all people of that just don't have much power in this country. He was my leader, in terms of shared my beliefs for sure, and I think he shared a lot of our beliefs that really wanted to see society change for the better. But the powerful oligarchy that I share runs this country is so bigoted, is so pro-war, is so greedy, and he was a threat to try to get more for the 99% of this country, and a threat to take away some from the 1%, or the 0.1%, I should say, that really run this country. And he was so charismatic and so popular that he would have popularized a number of great, changes, I think, political changes in terms of, civil things that help the greater distribution of wealth, national health care, the things that Bernie Sanders even just talked about in terms of free college and things like that were the kinds of things that Tupac believed in, because he was very critical of this hyper-capitalist way that the oligarchs want to keep running this country, where they keep increasing the cost of healthcare, and keep increasing the cost of college, and keep us really from owning anything of our own for the most part. We're all in so much debt most of our lives, and so they want to keep us under their thumb, and Tupac wanted to bring us out from under their thumb.
Do you have any thoughts or comments on the recent arrest of Reggie Wright Jr. for drug trafficking and money laundering?
Yeah, I think that it was a great development that they did catch them with this and bring them to justice, but and I think it's an advance. It's progress. It's progress for what you're doing, what I'm doing, progress for what other researchers are doing in terms of exposing some of these elements that were behind Tupac's assassination, that were behind the drug trafficking, that were behind the gun running and all that. And so I think, the rights were certainly part of that, and the rights were behind. I think one of the things we didn't talk about is the fact that one of Tupac's missions was to broker peace truces between the Bloods and the Crips, nationwide. And he was being very successful at that. And that was a peace movement that spread to New York, and even and they turned on to activism, a lot of these gangs. And so, the Young Lords took up this cause, and they convinced the Latin Kings, the largest gang in New York City, to turn into activism and stop drug dealing. And I talked to the head of the Latin Kings, King Tone, Antonio King Tone Fernandez, I believe his name is. I talked to him in it was 1996 or 1997, and he was doing some good activist work at that time. But they ended up framing him when really what they call conspiracy to to deal drugs charge, even though they couldn't find any trace of drugs anywhere around him or any of his fellow leaders of the Latin Kings. So, and this is well documented, their transformation, but the whole what Tupac was doing by calling these peace truces and bringing the Bloods and Crips leaders together and peace truce picnics and all was really amazing. And his code of thug life was a code to move gangs that weren't ready to give up drug dealing completely, to at least move them in a more positive direction in terms of reducing the harm they did in their communities with their drug dealing, by not dealing anywhere near kids or and other things like that. And so that was some of his great work. And that was a very important work, and that work was very dangerous for him because of the fact that drug trafficking makes incredible amounts of money for the CIA and the oligarchs in general. Not only do they get that money, a percentage of that money that's trafficked, but it's then laundered in corporate stocks and banks, and they own the banks. I mean, for example, John Pierpont Morgan, it's Morgan Chase, so what's it called again? I'm sorry. Just forget the largest bank in the world's name, but I think it's Morgan Chase, whatever. Because that's, it was last year, it was Forbes said it was the top bank. JP Morgan Chase was the top bank in the world. And this drug trafficking money is laundered through their stocks. Estimates are from Congress between $500 billion to $1 trillion is laundered each year. And so this woman, I have in my film how it's explained that the money that's laundered through stock companies actually increases that amount, the value of those stocks by 20 to 30 times because of the cash, because it's pure cash. And they think, well, if it made that much profit in 1 year, it could make that much for the next 20 years. And so the value of that stock rises by 20 times.
Retired LA County Sheriff's Lieutenant and his son, a one-time cop with the Compton Police Department, have been indicted on federal drug trafficking and money laundering charges, are both members of the Grape Street Crips gang. He and his son, Reggie Wright Jr., were both arrested last week in Southern California on federal drug trafficking and money laundering charges out of Memphis, Tennessee. Prosecutors say the father and son are among 22 gang members and gang associates responsible for running a drug pipeline from Los Angeles to a gang in Memphis. The drugs include heroin, marijuana, meth, and cocaine. Reggie Wright Jr. also worked at Compton PD, but later left law enforcement to work for Suge Knight and Death Row Records.
And so when you take that much laundered money out of an area by getting a gang in a certain area to stop dealing drugs, it's a huge decrease in profits for the companies that are laundering that money. And that was the major threat of Tupac to the drug launderers and the oligarchs who are involved in that drug money laundering.
This is a Jmix exclusive.
Whatever, shut up. Yeah.